Hello, my name is Raymond, and welcome back to another Project Feline devlog. So I've been gone from YouTube for about the last 6 months, and during that time I've been continuing to develop Project Feline. I've been working on more mechanics and trying to really nail down that core gameplay loop. However, it hasn't all been smooth sailing. There's been plenty of challenges and setbacks along the way, and I've been facing these sorts of challenges since the very first day of development. So in this episode, I want to share some of those challenges I've faced working as a solo game developer on a project to this scale for the last 3 years. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before working on Project Feline, I made about 20 small games. A lot of these were just tinkering projects or game jam projects. Either way, they were quite small, they didn't take too much time to make. These smaller projects were a great way to get a grasp on the workflow for all the different parts of game development. However, even completing those games, I still had this hunger to make something bigger. And that ultimately became the inception and motivation for Project Feline. Now, when I was a kid, I had this idea for a grand adventure game, borrowing inspiration from every game genre and with every art style. And ultimately, the idea wasn't that refined, but I remember the feeling that I wanted people to have when playing it. I never let that go. So when I started working on Project Feline, I wanted to start from that idea and see what I could turn it into. And it has gone very differently from how I expected, but in the best possible way. Through my experience so far, I feel like the journey to commit to something bigger is a very different journey from doing a game jam project. And the biggest difference I find is how I make decisions. When I do a game jam project, I find that decision making's quite easy. You can basically make any decision immediately, and there will rarely be any unforeseen consequences you'll have to face in the long term. Because once the game jam's over, the project's over, and you don't have to think about it ever again. When you commit to something bigger, however, I have to make decisions a lot more thoughtfully. So if I want to implement, say, a grind rail system, not only do I have to decide if that's a good idea right now, I also need to decide if that's going to be a good idea in the long term, in a year from now or 2 years from now. And I think that, for me, has been a very challenging thing to work with, is because every decision I make is going to have some long-term effect that I'm going to have to bear on my shoulders. And that pressure is new for me. It's something I haven't had to deal with before, and it's been stimulating to try and learn how to make more thoughtful decisions. On the other side of the coin, with that added pressure, it makes me put more time into each decision, and sometimes that's warranted and sometimes that's not. Oftentimes I feel I will spend way more time than necessary deciding something very simple, like where the camera angle should be. But on the other hand, that extra thought and effort does have a positive effect at times, especially when it comes to things like levels or character models, because those things are expensive, they take time, and in my head, I don't want to waste any time. I want to make sure I make the decision before I put in that time investment and make sure that that's what I want. Because I really want to avoid ending up in situations where I sink in a bunch of time to make something and then throw it in the bin. Now, of course, that is unavoidable. I think that'll always happen anyway. And the effort to try and reduce it, I think, has had some positive effects, but also there are some negative sides to it too, because you kind of end up falling into the analysis paralysis trap. So that whole process of trying to figure out where to invest more time in making decisions, like where to take that attitude and where not to take that attitude, has been quite interesting to figure out. And it's an experience I never would have had doing a small game jam project. Another challenge I have to face a lot is that with these bigger projects, they require a much bigger time investment than a weekend. And with that greater amount of time, I find that somehow I manage to spend a fair bit of that time doubting myself, questioning every decision. Every time I'm working, there's always this voice in the back of my head asking, is this fun enough? Is this good enough? And because I work alone, I kind of have to just deal with that myself. I don't have a boss to tell me if this is sufficient. I don't have a teacher to tell me if this is possible. I just have myself and my own judgment. Lately, I've been wondering where that voice comes from, that voice telling me that it's not good enough. And I feel that that voice comes from a fear of failure. And that's weird, right? Because I've had experiences in the past where failure has been to my benefit, where I've learned from failure, and I should already know that failure is good because everyone fails anyway, and it's an amazing teacher. Yet that fear still remains, and I think the reason that is because I'm trying my best to be time conscious. One of the tricky parts about navigating a bigger project when all you've done in the past are these small one-off game jam titles is that you need to spend more time on the game, but you don't want to spend more time than necessary. For a game jam, the time constraints are fixed. You have either like a weekend or a week, and there's no changing it. Whereas if you're making something bigger, and you decide when it ends, then you can keep shifting those goalposts indefinitely. When I want to experiment and try something, I know that that's going to cost me time, and if I end up having to throw it out, I feel kind of guilty, because that is time I'm not going to get back for something that is not going to get in the game. But for me, I think what's made failure more acceptable is knowing that yes, failure will cost time, but if that time is spent failing and learning, then that is time well spent. Another thing that's been hard to manage is the uncertainty, because no matter how much I know, there's always going to be something I don't know. With that, I've made a lot of interesting discoveries with my game. I've learned things about it that I never could have planned on paper. And sometimes it gets frustrating because I feel like I'm already supposed to know this stuff. I feel like I'm supposed to know in advance, before I make the game, how it's going to be, and whether it's going to be good. And recently I've noticed that not everyone does, and that's okay. And sometimes there's room for experimentation, and you just kind of let the game design itself. And it was a huge weight off my shoulders to remember that I don't have to know every little detail in advance. So, those are some of the challenges I face working as a solo game dev. I've made quite a few videos on my channel while working on this game over the last 3 years, and I hope I haven't made the process look easy, because it definitely isn't. It's quite challenging. And while I've delved into a bit of the negatives this episode, it's not to say that I don't enjoy the work. Figuring all of this out is very interesting to me. It's just not at all how I expected game development to be like, but that's cool, because I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and hit subscribe with notifications so you don't miss the next episode. I hope that my experiences were helpful for any aspiring game developers that may be watching. If you guys have similar sorts of stories or challenges, I would love to hear about them in the comments below. I'm working on a bunch of new stuff at the moment. It's not quite ready to show yet, but if you would like to see some of the progress I've been making, I have been streaming a lot of it on my Twitch channel. If you want to catch me live on stream, check the link in the video description. If you would like to support the production of these videos, I've opened a new Patreon page where members can donate on a per video basis and in return get their names in the credits as well as other exclusive rewards. Or if Patreon isn't your thing, you can check out some of my fine wares linked in the video description. For more updates in between videos, be sure to follow Project Feline on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook and join our Discord server. Thank you all so much for following my development journey, and I will see you in the next one.